Hi, everybody. I'm glad you could join us tonight for this webinar. I'm going to be talking about student collaboration and giving ideas, hopefully, for all you, and perhaps at the end you could share some of your ideas on working, students working together, particularly in teams. A little bit about myself. I often refer to my previous life prior to getting into teaching in education field. I spent a number of years as a family and adolescent therapist, which comes into play real handy when it's, particularly when you're talking about working with groups and group dynamics and how to do that. I also was have done adjunct faculty teaching, teaching psychology, both intro and adolescent psych. I'm coming up in January, my 10th anniversary of receiving my EDD from the University of Delaware, where I got it in educational leadership with a specialization in technology. How I got into the field was I went in as a computer teacher into a district, and then as more technology came aboard, I got into eventually becoming the tech coordinator for our district. I did that for a number of years, but the thing that I really missed was the collaboration that I had with teachers. I would do that occasionally with teachers as a tech coordinator, but really didn't get the opportunity to do it as much as I wanted. And I really missed working with kids. So an opening came up where a social studies teacher retired. I decided I wanted to go back in the classroom and basically practice what I preach. Because oftentimes as a tech coordinator, I felt like a little bit like, you know, the drug pusher. You know, it's like, here's this new technology. You got to try this. It's really good. And teachers would be like apprehensive because like, what do you know? You don't teach in the classroom. So going back in the classroom and integrating technology myself, it opened up and made, I think, in a lot of ways, teachers more receptive to like coming to me and talking about the technology that I use. I also presented a number of conferences around the country, as well as worked as an educational consultant with districts, both in advising on technology integration, as well as conducting workshops and trainings for that. Tonight, I want to focus on the whole idea about the group process and teamwork. What I find oftentimes is in talking to teachers, one of the problems they have is oftentimes what happens is they go into the classroom, okay, we're going to do this group project. And oftentimes what happens is you begin to see where students are just like randomly picked and put into a group. And often that, what results from that is you get what I call as family feuds, where you get people arguing with each other, people not working together. Some students will be like, well, I want to do it this way, and others will be, I want to do it that way. And then you get the students that oftentimes will be like, here's an idea, I have this great idea, and nobody's listening, and eventually you begin to see them tune out. So what I try to do is, one of the things that I ask students and I ask other teachers to look at is really, when have the students really learned what group work is and what the dynamics of group work is and what that process is about. And really, oftentimes you find there is no kind of lesson or course that they take. It's just basically put together. And so what I try to do is look at a better method of doing that. Usually in what I try to do, particularly at the beginning of the year, when school first starts, oftentimes what I do is first couple of weeks, well, not even that, the first couple of days, I kind of look at the group dynamics of what's going on in the class without really knowing the students. And I try to do it in a way where I'm not prejudging the kids and going by hearsay. Like sometimes you'll hear in passing with teachers like, oh, this child's really bad. So I try not to do that. I try to spend a couple days kind of just observing. I also go back and look at student records, and I look at the grades. I look at any comments teachers have. If there's an IEP or 504 plan, I try to look at that and start to begin to formulate what works, what's going to work as teams, and what's going to be most beneficial. I then oftentimes will, when I work on teams, I try to mix it up so there's kind of equal share of males and females, and also kind of levels of performance. So I won't have like all the high performers together, or so I try to really mix that up so there's quite a blend with that. And I try to also look at if there are behavioral issues, not to put not to get kids that set off each other into the same group, because then that becomes a nightmare. And I tell kids when I start groups that oftentimes it's not set in stone, is that if I need to make changes, that I'll make those changes. But before I do that, I have to always ask myself, is making those changes going to make any difference? Or am I really doing it for the convenience of myself, kind of saving myself that headache of like working with kids and finding that this is too much, let me make life easier for myself. So I'll constantly look at that and evaluate that. And one of the nice things with Classcraft is as I'm putting these teams together, since I do use Classcraft, that's where I'll set up these teams initially, so I know who's going with who. One of the things that I talk to students about, and I also talk to teachers when it comes to looking at teamwork, is the number one problem that I see constantly that makes it a failure is the whole idea about communications. That's the most important aspect about the process. When communications breaks down, that's when the team breaks down. And what I often say to students is that it's kind of, you have to be open to be able to hear and listen to others. And for me, in doing that is I'm always checking in with teams throughout the process. Whatever team building assignment or project we're doing, I'm always checking in with that. And I'm always reminding them that each person is a valuable piece of the team and that everybody needs to do your job. And the way I kind of equate that to is I tell them, like, for those that know, and I tell the kids, it's kind of like an accordion, playing an accordion. In order for the accordion to make any sound or be functional, you have to go in and out with the accordion to make it have sound. And that's the way I look at teams, is that they always have to kind of come in and go out together and check in with each other frequently to make sure everybody understands who's doing what and what still is left to be done and who's going to take responsibility for that. And in doing so, what I try to do is look for the tools that make it effective, make teamwork effective, and get kids excited about it. And as I mentioned here, some of the ones that I like to use to do that is Classcraft. I've also used Breakout, EDU. I've also used, I kind of set up my class at times as like CSI classroom. For example, when I was teaching before about Lutzi, the ice bin, and they looked at what happened to Lutzi, and they read a story about it. We watched a video about it and talked about it. And there was several theories. Was he murdered for power? Was he murdered for the things that he had collected? Or did he die accidentally? And so what I did in that case is put teams together, and they had to do the research and investigate and find out which one was it, and try to convince the others that their theory about what happened to Utsi was the correct theory. So oftentimes I'll set up this kind of CSI that I'm always telling them, well, any project that we do, they have to kind of be like detectives. And they have to do the research and gather their facts to prove their case. And oftentimes in the beginning, particularly, it's, as I say here, you make a few steps forward and there's some steps that go back. And I'll repeat this over and over again. The biggest thing where things begin to break down is when they stop communicating or they don't know how to communicate. And one of the problems I find today is kids are really good at social communication, through all social media or just being social. But when it comes to things like doing project-based learning, all of a sudden they get lost and have a difficult time communicating with each other. So I'm always working with that. Also, you get the stubbornness where it's like, I want to do it this way, and I've always done it this way, and it works. So I'm always looking at that. But, and I'll say this over and over again, communications is the most important part. The other things that happen oftentimes is in this day and age, oftentimes students want instant answers. What they want to do is, if I pose questions, I'm always posing questions to them in this group process. And I'm telling them there's no real right or wrong answer. What it is what is your thinking? And what your findings are based on the facts that you find. And in order to do that, I often say, and they repeat this over in class in unison, is the first thing is you got to read, in some cases. And then when you read or watch videos, what I expect back from you to kind of prove your case as a team is details. As many details as you can to be able to get your point across. And for me to understand and others to understand what's behind your thinking. And part of that is getting them really, truly to talk to each other. And as I said before, a lot of times are very good social talkers. But when it comes time to do a project-based learning, they don't know how to communicate with each other. So it's important that I kind of step in to help them with that process. And in doing that, it also kind of separates as they work together to kind of pose these questions. It really gets them what I call getting out of Disneyland thinking, this magical thinking, that if they have this answer, whether they back it up with details, with facts or not, it's an okay answer. So I always tell them it's Disney versus reality, and I'm always trying to push them into the reality aspect of things. One of the things about doing team-based and project-based learning that I really like is it really frees me up. It allows me, I'm not attached to any place. I'm not standing up in front of the classroom lecturing to them. I don't do that at all. As kind of Alan November talks about owning your own learning. Students need to own their own learning. And so what I can do is they're working on things. I always have my radar up, and I'm always looking and listening for any type of problems that teams are having. And I'm really encourage them to work together to find answers and solve problems. And really a part of that process in teaching the group is really to learn to listen to each other and talk to each other, not talk at each other, but talk with each other. And oftentimes I tell them, and this is the thing that they really sometimes don't understand, is that if I have a group of 5, for example, and they're working together, I always, because sometimes I try to be a little bit like, not gory, but I'll tell them it's like, we have 5 people here, and what we're going to do is we're going to take your 5 brains and mash them together into one master brain. And that's kind of what working together is, because sometimes somebody in the group may get stuck or will often say, well, I know what I'm thinking, but I don't know how to say it. And I'll work with that group and say, hey, well, just try to do that. Try to explain what you're saying. And oftentimes other kids, through kids speak, will be able to like, oh, I know what they're saying. They really mean this. And then you get that kind of snowball effect where they all start kind of feeding off of each other. And that really seems to work really well. Oftentimes, too, is what happens is I've had teams that are getting nowhere, and they'll be working and they'll be spending all their time arguing with each other or just breaking down while students breaking down and not working. And they'll look around the room and they'll see other teams that are working together and moving forward and moving on. And all of a sudden, I could say all these things to them, but when they see other teams working together, all of a sudden you'll see they'll have this aha moment. Hey, wait, why are they working so well and we're not? And when they stop and listen and look at the other students, the other teams, they get that aha moment. Well, maybe if we do things differently, maybe if we do start communicating with each other, maybe we can get through and begin to really learn how to cooperate. And that's a great sense when you see that begin to happen with students. One of the things that I do is I use, particularly I'm so happy that Classcraft came out with these quests, because it's a great team building, team opportunity for students to use. And one of the things that we do is right now, we were studying ancient Greece, and we were looking at different types of governments. And this was a chart that I gave them that they had to kind of fill in. And they had to kind of start at like monarchy and look at the head of state. And when they understood the head of state, that could help them kind of answer the next one, who are the decision makers. And those two together could learn, and they could talk about how power is acquired. And when they got through this process, they were utilizing several resources, one being Discovery Ed online. When they begin to communicate with each other, they begin to like understand that, well, one, the answer is not going to pop out of whatever they're reading or watching and smack them in the head and, oh, here's the answer. It's not going to be that way. They're going to have to work together and communicate with each other and pass ideas back and forth. That way they can draw some conclusions as a team. And as they go down the scale and look at monarchy and look at maybe some of the problems with monarchy, what they then began to see is why perhaps the government began to transition to another form of government, which was oligarchy. And then as they go through that, what didn't work with that? Why was the change to tyranny and then democracy? So as they go down and across, they begin to communicate more and more and begin to see why certain things don't work. And I encourage them to think about in your life, when something doesn't work, do you keep with it or do you look for changes? And by going through this activity, it kind of builds on what's coming up next and then what's coming up after that. And through that process, they begin to get an idea on where we're going with things. So what I did with this case is that I took teams, and then from teams, I built bigger teams. And that those members from the various teams had to get together. And what I did is I broke them down to, okay, which place would you rather live, in Sparta or Athens? And based on discussions and look at what they've discovered previously, utilizing prior knowledge, because that's so key here, is that always utilize prior knowledge. They're able to share information that they're going to use in the debate. And basically, the teams got together and they were going to try to convince the other side why they were a better choice, whether it was Athens or Sparta, and gave the reasons why, to try to convince others from the other team to come together and choose that for themselves. So oftentimes from teams, I'll build bigger teams. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll take one member from one team, and if there's a specific topic, and I'll break topics down and have teams come together, from people from other teams come together, work together, and then go back to their original team and share it. They become the teachers themselves to teach the other aspects to them. As I mentioned, I often tell students to always use your prior knowledge. Use your what you've learned before to help formulate your answers today. In that, sometimes you get the students that are always looking for the shortcuts. They're the ones that want to do the minimum for the maximum. And I often explain to them that oftentimes when you take that process, you're going to wind up taking longer time to complete something than if you just took your time and put it together and gathered your ideas in the first place. Because what's going to happen is I'm, in most cases, going to send you back to get more details, to explain more of what you're doing. And then again, I emphasize that they're all in this together. They have to work together. And when they work together and they communicate together, they're going to have more successful results. And oftentimes what I'll do is when they struggle with this about taking shortcuts or trying to find the easy way out, or they'll tell me, I really tried to do this. I often give my little pencil experiment. And what I do is I take a pencil and I put it on the table. And I ask students, for volunteers, come up and try to pick up this pencil. And so I'll get students to come up, and the first student will come up and grab the pencil, pick it up. And I say, no, try to pick up the pencil. And I'll put it down and ask for another student. And you'll sometimes get a number of students. And then all of a sudden, somebody in the group will get it. And they'll come up, and as they reach for the pencil, they'll try really hard to pick it up and not pick it up. And I'll say to them, that's the whole thing about trying versus doing, is that oftentimes what you're doing is you're trying supposedly really hard, but you're not really doing it. And you're wasting a lot of energy. And if you took that energy and put it into what needs to be done, you'd be amazed at what you can accomplish. So that's a lesson that I use all the time with students. And I'll just, once I've used it once, I'll just say to them, just remember the pencil. And they begin to get it. As well as Classcraft, I've also used Breakout, which is another great tool to use to encourage teamwork. And once again, as I've said before, the big part of all this process is communication. And the idea of hearing versus listening. Are you really hearing what a person's saying? Or are you kind of just, it's kind of going in, but you're thinking what your response to the next person is? And so what I try to get them to do is really listen to what that person's saying in your group. And oftentimes, once again, as they do that and they get better at it, they get those aha moments. And also the thing is, when they don't do that and they look around, particularly with Breakout, and they look around and they see like, wow, this team's really making progress on unlocking these locks. What's going on with us? Why aren't we doing that? And they begin to see, well, maybe we need to take a step back and look at our process. And that's usually where I step in to really work with them on kind of brainstorming, asking questions, posing questions to each other, and understanding what it is that you need to do. With Breakout, what I found, and with Classcraft and team building tools such as that, students like the competition. They like the idea of competing. They get very excited at it. And when you see a team open up a lock, and the excitement that comes over, and as they unlock more and more locks, the thrill that goes on is incredible. One of the ones that I found is, once again, when they look around, sometimes I can do teacher speak and they may not get it, but when they look around, they see others being successful. That kind of gives them a lesson. For example, on one of them, they had to take a flashlight, and in invisible ink was a message somewhere. And in the beginning, I had some kids running all over the classroom, just randomly, not looking at the clue, but just randomly shining the flashlight anywhere to see where this hidden message was. And what they begin to see is, before they do that, maybe they really need to sit down and discuss what the clue is about and throw out ideas to each other, what these clues mean. And when they began to do that, they began to better able to understand what I was looking for and what was successful with them with opening up the boxes. So I find that oftentimes is a real helpful thing to do. The other thing I do is I give prizes out. I call them cheap, cheesy prizes. What I do is I go to the dollar store and I have a drawer, and like teams, as they were successful with this, they can go to the cheap, cheesy prize drawer and pick out something for opening up the box. Also, you'll notice the one girl in this picture is holding a little certificate, and what that did is I gave them points for next project or test they can utilize to boost up their grade for that. But they really like that idea of being able to compete and not a vicious way, but kind of in a very fun way. So I find that is also a good tool to use. Then there are the obstacles. One of the problems that I find sometimes, particularly when it's team-based, is sometimes I'll get an email or phone call from a parent about their child. Well, they don't really like to work in groups. They'd rather do it themselves. And if one child's not doing their fair share, why is my child having to do all the work? And what I try to do is oftentimes I use what I call the Columbo Approach with parents, is that I really, for those that remember the show Columbo, it's a rather old show, but it was like I don't know, I put logic back at them to get them to really look at it, because oftentimes it is logic versus hearsay. They hear something from their child and think that must be the way it is. And what I often do is just, here are the facts, and really look at that. And in often cases, that tends to diffuse that problem. Also get into, and this was mentioned in this book, Columbo of the American Mind, is that now what we're finding is we're moving from helicopter parents that kind of hover over to what is referred to as bulldozer parents, where parents you're finding are beginning to try to clear the way of any obstacles for the child in the educational process. So if there are people that are in a group that don't work well with their child, they want to push them out of the way and have them work with somebody that they get along with, or as a best friend or something like that. And what I try to get parents to look at is, are you doing your child a favor by doing that? And in the long run, what you're going to find, and one of the things that they talk about in this book, is the idea is now you're finding college students, as they get to college, is that their coping mechanisms are lacking. They don't know how they're so used to being kind of overprotective and having that way cleared, so there's no situations where there's conflict and having to resolve those conflicts, that they don't know what to do or how to handle a situation. And so really that's the other thing, is that I work with parents on looking at is like, you really need to look at this long term, because are you doing your child any favor by kind of taking this bulldozer approach? Another one that I like is a book, The End of Molasses Classes, which really talks about not every child deserves a cookie. It's like you don't need to, like, when a project comes along, particularly in the beginning of the year, oftentimes what I find is, as we're doing projects, kids may not score as high as they thought they should do. And, I'll get these emails or phone calls from parents, shocked, why? My child's never done this bad before. And what I'll explain to them is that, simply giving a child like an A or a B simply for just putting anything together is a disservice to the child. What may start off as an initial project not done so well, is that eventually, as the time goes on and the year goes along, they begin to have better expectations themselves, and they actually wind up doing a better job. And that's where also the team concept comes in, because they begin to become teachers themselves. They begin to teach each other. And so I find getting through that obstacle with parents is a constant thing that I'm always dealing with, particularly in the beginning of the year. Then as the year goes along, parents begin to kind of get the idea, for the most part. It's not perfect, though, that I still sometimes throughout the year, I don't want my child working with this child in a group. And I just kind of deal logically with them, as about, in life, they're going to run into people. Nobody works in isolation, and they're going to work together with people. And sometimes they're going to work together with people that they really don't get along with. And they're going to have to learn those coping skills on how to get along with people. Another obstacle that I find that we run into is this unfortunate idea of teaching to the test. I'm finding more and more over the course of the years that I've been involved in education, more and more schools are turning to teaching to the test. Now, they may not say they are, but, you know, actions speak louder than words. When you base your whole curriculum around testing and testing scores, you may say you're not teaching the test, but you're really teaching to the test. And what I try to do is I try to explain to other teachers and to administrators is that when you take a kind of team project-based approach, the way I often explain it to is the analogy I give for those that live in snow country is like a snowplow coming down the road. No matter, and the snow could be, you know, over the car size snow, number of feet. And I tell them it's like when you do project-based learning, team-based, when you look at multiple intelligence, when you look at student-centered approach, is that all those things that you worry about on the test are like that plow. And that plow is going to just come through and take care of all those things that the testing requirements are going to look at. So I oftentimes will say, you know, I don't worry about that so much, is that in the process of the way that I set up my class, those things that are being tested are being taken care of in the process, so that there's not the issue of having to worry about teaching to the test. The other thing that I find is that it's important for you to build your own network. And in so doing that is look for the teachers that you can work with that have similar ideas. They might not have all the answers. They may not be well-versed in technology, but they have that same kind of philosophy of a student-based, project-based, team-based learning, and really to work with them. And that by working together with others, it really helps build a strong network. And there are power in numbers. When you work together and as a whole, and you begin to see the success across different classes and different assignments, people begin to notice that. It's interesting when I first started using Classcraft, and the word was like, you know, playing some game with the kids in the class. And that was kind of the hearsay. But when people began to come into my class to observe and see how I was utilizing Classcraft, particularly around now with the Quest, they begin to see, it begins to open up their eyes that there's other ways to be able to work with students that are more geared to them than to kind of a more teacher-centered approach. And then I'm always looking more in the long term versus the short term. What are the benefits really long term towards the process that you take? As I said before, when I was talking about breakout, excitement is contagious. When you begin, there's nothing more exciting when I'm in a class, whether I'm doing Classcraft, where I'm doing the CSI, whether I'm doing breakout, when you begin to see those light bulbs go off, when kids are working together, and all of a sudden where they were stuck at a certain point, all of a sudden as they begin to brainstorm, and this is sometimes happens when I'm sitting with a group and kind of, I always become like the therapist of the group in work, having them work together and cooperate together, is that when they begin to see that process happen in those light bulbs and they begin to see and open up and see ideas that they have, there's nothing more. It's a great feeling as me as a teacher, and it's a great feeling for the students to see that for themselves. And sometimes what I find is really them open up and communicating with each other works much more effective than me telling them something, because I can tell them a lot of different things, and sometimes it's like the Charlie Brown teacher where it's just wah, 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 wah. They're not really hearing me. But when they hear from another student, as I mentioned before, like somebody may have an idea, it's like, I don't know how to say it. I know what I want to, I know what I'm thinking, but I don't know how to say it. And when they begin to start working together with each other and see that, it's just, for me, a very exciting thing. And as I also mentioned before, and I mentioned here, is when you have those communication breakdown, when teams aren't working, and they look around the room and they see other groups working together and they're working effectively, it's like, what is the world telling you? What is your world telling you? Is that as you see them working and they're actually having fun, and you're sitting there as a team feeling miserable, like, what are they doing differently than what our team's doing? And I'll say this over and over, communication is the number one breakdown. And what I always work with them to do is when I see students not getting along with each other, first thing, I pull them together. I let them vent a little bit, and then I began to go, okay, so where are you stuck? What areas are you stuck? Who's doing what right now? And oftentimes when I start doing that, it's like they're not sure where they're stuck. They're not sure what still needs to be left to be done as a team. And what I try to do is work them through that process and talk, okay, let's see what you're doing. Where are you stuck? What things do you need to still get done? What as a team do you need to get done? What's left that needs to be done? And as they begin to get through that whole process of just being angry at each other, then you begin to see the communications and the ideas begin to flow. So what I find is sometimes there are certain groups where I need to spend considerably more time with them than others. And so that's, as I said before, where my radar is always up, and I'm always moving around to see where things are at with teams and trying to intervene where I see intervention needs to be happening. And when you look at doing team or group projects, what often I tell people is, because some people will say to me, well, you're using this or that, I don't know how to use it. There are many tools out there that you can use. There's no real right or wrong tool to use. And sometimes I think teachers get stuck with that. They think, well, they're using this. Well, I don't want to use that also. That was the situation with me with Classcraft when I first started. And I began to introduce the teachers like, well, I don't want to use something that you're using. I'm like, it's not mine. It's for anybody. Anybody can use it. And if you find it effective, why not? I'm not one to, hold everything. Sometimes sometimes teachers will be like, this is my little thing and nobody else can use it. Or you get into that little school on the prairie where it's like you're this one room classroom or school and you never communicate outside of that. What I try to do is get them to look at what do they feel comfortable with, what tools have they used have been successful, what tools might they be interested in. And the key thing that I get them to, and I drive people nuts with this, is I always ask, what is your ultimate goal with your students? What is it that you want the students to accomplish? I've had situations where teachers, few years back was, well, my ultimate goal is I want them to put together a Microsoft Publisher brochure. I'm like, no, that's not your ultimate goal. That's a tool that you can use, but really, what is your ultimate goal? And what I really try to do, and I've done this also with pre-service teachers, is to come up, what is it out of this, whatever tool you're using, whatever project, what is it that you want the students to accomplish? Because what I tell them is you know what your ultimate goal is, then you can work backwards and develop a plan on how you're going to get to that ultimate goal. And there's many roads to choose to do that. And you don't always have to have everybody doing the same thing. In a lot of cases, I look at it as, when you look at multiple intelligence, kids have different strengths and work better in whether it's visual or audio. What I try to do is there's many of those paths that students can take to reach that ultimate goal. And sometimes it's a difficult struggle. I can remember I taught for pre-service teachers a course on technology integration, and I had them, it was the course I taught was coming up with a project that they could utilize, that when they became a teacher, they could take with them and actually have something that they could actually use. And it was based on technology integration. And one group, it was actually a pair, as they were getting started and thinking of ideas of what they wanted to do and something that was student-based, their idea was, okay, we're going to have the students move from their desks to the floor and read a story. And that's going to be more student-centered. I'm like, no, that's not what I really mean. That's not what really student-centered is. Simply moving from chairs to the floor. That it's more than that. And then again, and I drive people crazy, I always ask them, what is your ultimate goal with the students? Because if you know that, then you can begin to formulate different plans on how to get to that. As I mentioned, one of the things that sometimes we find ourselves doing is getting into isolation, where we're almost like that one-room schoolhouse that we kind of work in and we get so busy in our own room and having to do all the things that we need to do that oftentimes we don't really get out and have the opportunity to share. And what I'm always trying to do, whether it's in formal situations or informal, if I'm sitting around together with teachers at lunch or outside of school, is really to get them to talk about kind of what ideas they have. And how we can work together collaboratively to come up with ideas. Even though I may teach social studies, working with other teachers in other curriculums, how they can utilize technology, integrate technology, and kind of really come up with team-based teaching ideas. And the always thing that I keep in mind is, as I say here, what are the flowers, not the rocks? What you're often going to find sometimes is that you're going to find that there are going to be teachers that no matter what you do, they're not going to be happy with it. Or they're going to be naysayers. That's not going to work. Oh, I tried that before. Oh, it's not working for me. What I try to do is okay, fine. What I try to do is look for those teachers that are open to those ideas and really work with them. And often, like I said, even those teachers that may be naysayers will at times come around. For example, in my district, I was the first one to utilize a Moodle in my district. And I didn't really say anything to teachers. I just kind of started using it. And then all of a sudden, teachers began to come to me and ask me, what's this Moodle thing that you're using? And began to teach them about Moodle and what they did. And then the next, our whole district at one point began to use Moodle. Now we're starting to make that shift to Google Classroom. But it's the whole idea, sometimes the kids can be your network. They go in, it's like, how come you're not doing this when in this other class we're doing something that you're not? And then I'll have teachers come to me and ask me about that. But initially, like I say, it's important to find those that are open to your ideas and are willing to work with you. And you yourself be open to other ideas yourself. That I always tell teachers, I don't know it all. And I'm not saying because this works for me, it's going to necessarily work for you. Find what's comfortable for you. And don't try to compare yourself. I often call it the bulletin board wars. Years ago when, I don't know if it's so true today, but teachers would have bulletin boards outside their classrooms, and one teacher would put it up, things on the bulletin board for the month, and another teacher would look at it. It's like, well, I've got to do better than that, and you get these bulletin board wars going. What I try to tell teachers is that don't try to compare. Do something that you're comfortable with, and start small, and then you can work big. And don't be afraid of failure. And because sometimes failure is the route to progress. And when groups work together, what I do is I'm always looking for hooks. What gets students' attention? What things seem to be working effectively in class? And as I do different things in class, I try to look at how the group is reacting to it. And oftentimes at the end of a project, when they're working as a team, I'll put an online survey out, or I'll have a discussion in class and see, and I'll ask them to honestly, tell me what worked, what didn't, and to be honest about it. And then maybe tweak some things that I've done based on the feedback that I get. Also, during the whole process of this team work, I'm always listening, looking for clues of what's working and what's not, and what maybe I'll need to change as we go along. Break time. Also, during the process and after the process, I'm always reflecting. I'm always looking at what I'm doing, how's it working for the kids, is there things that I need to change? And what I'm always trying to do is, rather than just throwing something out and saying it's not going to work, is I try to maybe fine-tune things. Maybe this part, maybe I didn't explain it so well as far as what the task was that they had to complete. Maybe I need to put it differently, or maybe it was too difficult for them, or maybe it was too easy. So I'm always kind of reflective during the process and after, like, how can I make changes that will be effective as I move forward and use that. Which gets into the whole idea of building your own library of tools and things that are effective to use. The great thing is that once you have it, you got it forever, hopefully. And when you're first starting to kind of build this library, it's always hardest when you first start off. I think years back when the whole idea of electronic grade books came in, and I had a grade book that I was using on my computer, and I had another teacher, and this course is going back a ways, but had all of her in the old teacher grade book, and she would spend hours upon hours, particularly at the end of the market period, with her calculator calculating out grades and getting averages and all that, and I was using my computer, and I would just plug in things and it would automatically calculate those things for me. And when I talked to her, she was like, well, it takes too much time. It's like, yeah, but once you do it, it's there, you've got it. And it makes it that much easier in the long run. And for me, building some of these things, particularly when I'm putting together quests, I'm always looking for things. As I'm building them, I'm getting excited with building the quests themselves, because I think, oh, this is going to be really great. If you feel like, well, I don't have the time to do that, I'm also a big proponent of don't reinvent the wheel. That there are resources out there. For example, Breakout has these subject packs. Classcraft now has come out with the marketplace, which really is helpful. And the bottom line really here is to turn teaching into a venture for not only your students, but for you. And as I said before, when I see students getting that aha moment where they're really excited about things and the way things are working, it's hard. I think probably all of you as a teacher know that experience when you see that happening. It just kind of warms the heart.